If you are 43 years old and lying awake at night doing arithmetic in your head, I want you to know something before we go any further. The arithmetic is not only about money, it is about future peace. That distinction matters more than people realize. A great many men and women reach their 40s believing the next 20 years will be determined mainly by how much more they can earn. They assume the game is still about chasing a bigger income, a better title, a larger house, a nicer car, a cleaner image of success. They tell themselves that if they can just push a little harder, keep climbing, keep improving, keep stretching, the stress will eventually ease on its own. I have watched that belief damage a lot of lives, not because income does not matter. Income matters. I like income. I like productive effort. I like people becoming more valuable to the world and being paid accordingly. But by the time a person reaches his 40s, the great dividing line is rarely income alone. The dividing line is structure. What percentage of your life is already promised away before the month even begins? How much of your income is spoken for by fixed obligations? How much margin exists between what comes in and what absolutely must go out? How fragile your household becomes when one ordinary thing goes wrong? That is what determines whether your 60s feel calm or hunted. It is not a glamorous truth, which is one reason so many people miss it. I want to begin with a simple image. You are 43. It is a Tuesday night. The house is quiet enough that you can finally hear your own thoughts. Your phone lights up with a message from the banking app. Your checking balance slipped below some number you told yourself you would never let it fall under again. You lie there and start doing the usual math. Mortgage, car payment, insurance, groceries, kids' activities, credit card due next week, the little school fee you forgot, the repair that is coming, the trip you agreed to, the medical bill you still have not dealt with properly. And what unsettles you most is not that you are broke. You are not broke. You are probably making more money than you have ever made in your life. That is exactly why the feeling is so disturbing. You thought more income would buy more calm. Instead, it bought larger obligations. That is the paradox of middle adulthood. Many people reach their 40s more successful on paper than they have ever been, and more financially trapped in daily experience than they ever expected. I have spent a lot of years studying money, but I have never found the subject most interesting when it sits in equations by itself. What interests me is what money does to human lives, what it allows, what it buys besides things, what it buys in the nervous system, what it buys in a marriage, what it buys in a career, what it buys in the ability to walk away from what should no longer be tolerated. That is why I care so much about this particular decade. Your 20s matter. Yes. Your 30s matter, of course. But the 40s are different in a way most people do not fully grasp until the decade is almost over. Your 40s are where three forces collide. Your earning power is usually near its peak or approaching it. You still have enough time left for compounding to do very heavy lifting. And many of the expense categories that expanded through your 30s are finally stabilizing enough that real margin could appear if you let it. That combination is rare. It does not last forever. It is one of the most powerful financial windows in a person's life. And because it is so powerful, what you do with it matters far more than the average person understands. I have seen two people earn similar incomes, live in similar neighborhoods, raise similar families, and still arrive at retirement in worlds so different. It looked almost unfair. One reaches 65 with a paid-off home, meaningful investment accounts, enough cash flow to breathe easily, enough reserves to sleep well, enough freedom to help children and grandchildren without resentment, enough flexibility to say yes to joy and no to humiliation. The other reaches the same age with a mortgage, still hanging on, too little saved, too much monthly strain, too much dependence on Social Security, too much quiet fear that one bad surprise will force a dignity-destroying decision. People like to describe these outcomes as luck. Very often they are not luck. Very often they were built in the 40s. Not through one giant heroic act, through a series of decisions that felt small while they were being made. One family stretched for a larger house because the children needed room, and because everyone around them seemed to be doing something similar. One family kept the house that was already good enough and sent the difference into productive assets month after month. One family upgraded 2 cars at once because after years of work they felt they had earned something nicer. One family bought reliable used vehicles and refused to confuse transportation with identity. One family let every raise expand the lifestyle. One family quietly redirected much of every raise toward savings, investing, and debt reduction before the new money had time to become emotional. One family financed college in a way that weakened the parents' future. One family found a way to help without setting the parents' retirement on fire. 10 years later, the difference looked huge. During those 10 years, it did not always look huge. That is how compounding and fixed cost work. The pain and the advantage both begin quietly. Then, once enough years have passed, the gap becomes startling. If you want to understand why the 40s matter so much, begin with this simple fact. A dollar saved and invested at 40 has time to become several dollars by the time a person reaches retirement. A dollar not saved at 40 because it was consumed by a lifestyle decision is not merely $1 gone. It is a chain of future dollars erased. That is why the decisions feel so disproportionate in hindsight. People think they are saying yes to a larger kitchen, a newer SUV, a club membership, a school upgrade, a prestige zip code, or a payment that still seems manageable because income is higher than it used to be. What they are often really saying yes to is a less flexible future self. A future self with fewer choices. A future self who must work longer, worry more, and tolerate more nonsense. Because the 40s were spent financing appearances rather than freedom. Now, I do not think money should be a religion of denial. I have never admired false asceticism. I do not think the point of a good life is to die with the largest possible account and the smallest possible memory. The point is not to turn your 40s into a monastery. The point is to understand which expenditures deepen life and which ones simply harden obligations. That is the distinction mature people must learn. A lot of spending in the 40s is not really about joy. It is about fear. Fear of looking behind. Fear of being judged. Fear of saying no when everyone else seems to be saying yes. Fear of admitting that more income does not automatically mean the next lifestyle tier is wise. That fear creates some very expensive decisions. The cruel thing is that those expensive decisions often feel reasonable when they happen. Take housing. This is almost always the largest lever. A family in its 40s feels squeezed in the current house. The children are older. Everyone wants more privacy. The neighborhood with the better schools, the more polished homes, the more admired street names begins to feel appropriate for a household that has worked hard and finally reached a higher income bracket. The upgrade often feels like success, and perhaps in some emotional sense it is. But money does not care how a purchase feels. Money cares what the purchase does. If the larger house raises the monthly outflow by $1,500 or $2,000 or more after mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities, upkeep, furnishing, and all the other invisible companions that arrive with a larger property, then that decision is not merely a housing decision. It is a capital allocation decision of enormous scale. People rarely calculate it this way. They should. An extra $18,000 per year not invested over 20 or 25 years is not a small indulgence. It is the difference between one retirement and another. It can be the difference between calm and dependence. It can be the difference between helping your grandchildren and resenting every request. The public likes to say a home is an investment. Sometimes it is. A house is also shelter identity. Taxes, repairs, illiquidity, neighborhood risk, maintenance, and the emotional center of a family's life. It is not one thing. That is exactly why it deserves more careful thinking than the public usually gives it. The house that is slightly smaller than what you can technically afford may not flatter the ego much, but it can quietly finance your future freedom in a way the bigger house cannot. And I have always found freedom more beautiful than prestige. Cars follow the same logic, only people hide from that truth behind the language of comfort and reliability. I have no objection to reliable transportation. Reliable transportation is sensible. The trouble begins when the car stops being transportation and becomes a rolling expression of self-regard. Then the monthly payment swells, then the insurance rises, then the maintenance on the nicer model is treated as normal, because the initial decision already moved the whole baseline upward. People do this twice, because most households have 2 cars. Then they act astonished that their cash flow feels tight, despite high income. They do not feel the full cost because the bill arrives monthly, not all at once. If every car decision had to be paid in one giant lump, people would think much more carefully. Installments are one of the ways the world helps people avoid seeing the true weight of their own choices. The 40s are full of installment traps. That is why the decade matters so much. It is the era when a person can finally afford large obligations and therefore finally has the power to injure his future in impressive size while still feeling responsible. That is a dangerous combination. Now let me tell you about something most people never discuss properly. The psychology of money scarcity changes the quality of a person's thinking. When a household has no margin, every financial surprise becomes mentally expensive, long before it becomes numerically expensive. A car repair is not just a repair. It is a week of bad sleep. A medical bill is not just a bill. It is a narrowing of attention. A delayed bonus is not merely delayed income. It becomes a chain reaction in the mind. I have read enough and watched enough to know that scarcity does something terrible to otherwise capable people. It pulls their thoughts into the immediate crisis. It makes next week feel more urgent than next decade. It reduces strategic thinking because the nervous system is busy triaging what is on fire right now. That is not a character flaw. It is how people work. And it is one more reason margin matters so much. A family with no margin may technically have a decent income and still live in a state of constant cognitive pressure. A family with margin does not merely have more money. It has more mental space that is a hidden form of wealth the public almost never talks about. The emergency fund is not only a pile of cash, it is a reduction in panic. It is a buffer between the event and the breakdown. It is what gives you the ability to think instead of merely react. The difference between a household with 6 months of expenses and a household with 2 weeks of breathing room is not just arithmetic. It is the difference between negotiating with life and begging life for one more polite month. I have always preferred the first position. When you have margin, career decisions change. You can leave the boss who has been quietly damaging your life. You can reject the demand that violates your values. You can take the calculated career leap that might increase your future earnings because a temporary gap no longer means family panic. You can invest in your own skill development. You can wait for the right opportunity rather than lunging at the nearest paycheck. This is what I call walk-away money. Not retirement money. Not enough to vanish from the world and become a philosopher on a porch. Enough to stop being financially blackmailed by ordinary life. That is worth a great deal. The 40s are the perfect decade to build it. Because the children are not infants anymore, the career is more established, the income is stronger, and time is still long enough for the capital you preserve to become something powerful. But you only get that result if you actually preserve it. This is where lifestyle creep becomes so vicious. Lifestyle creep does not usually look like extravagance. It looks like an updated normal. That is why it gets through the door so easily. A bigger mortgage because rates once looked manageable. A nicer car because the old one felt beneath your new income. More expensive vacations because the children are older and you only live once. Better schools, better subscriptions, better clothing, better everything. Each decision on its own feels survivable. Together they build a life with no oxygen. And once a household loses oxygen, the future gets negotiated away 1 month at a time. Here is something I want every serious person to understand. Not all spending is equal, and not all restraint is wise. I am not asking people to become joyless. I am asking them to identify the spending that has permanent monthly consequences. Those are the dangerous ones. A dinner out, a weekend trip, a gift, a celebration, these can be fine if the structure underneath is strong, but a larger mortgage, a larger car payment, tuition financed without a plan, recurring lifestyle upgrades that harden into fixed expectations, these are dangerous because they convert one emotional choice into 1,000 future payments. That is where people lose decades. The 40s are full of decisions that feel like present tense rewards and behave like long-term contracts. I have always believed the intelligent question is not simply, can I afford this now? The intelligent question is, what does this do to the next 20 years of my life? That question would save a lot of people if they asked it more often. Suppose a family reaches 40 with $180,000 in retirement savings, a steady combined income, 2 children, and a house that is adequate but not glamorous. This family is not rich, but it is also not in a hopeless position. It is in exactly the kind of position where the next 10 years matter enormously. One path says upgrade the house because you finally can, upgrade the cars because you have earned them, stretch for the private school or the expensive campus because you want the best. Reduce retirement contributions temporarily because life is expensive right now and you will catch up later. That path feels ordinary. It is what many people do. The second path says stay put if the current house works. Keep investing consistently even when the social pressure to spend more is intense. Tell the children the truth about what the family can do for college without destroying the parents' future. Take career risk where the odds make sense. Root raises into savings before routing them into lifestyle. That second path looks less impressive from the street. It also tends to produce a much calmer life at 60. I have seen this too many times to treat it as an abstract theory. People look at retirement outcomes and imagine some hidden difference in talent. Very often the hidden difference was nothing more glamorous than protecting margin during the 40s. Let me make the arithmetic plain. If a couple can save and invest $15,000 or $20,000 per year beginning at 40, those dollars have enough time to become meaningful capital. If they delay because the 40s are expensive and tell themselves they will really get serious in their 50s, the math turns much colder. Compounding is generous, but it is not infinitely patient. Money saved at 40 behaves very differently from money saved at... That is not morality, that is just time. This is one reason I dislike hearing people say it is too late at 45 or 48. Too late compared with what? Compared with age 25. Yes, some easy years were lost, compared with the consequences of waiting until 55. No, it is not too late at all. The 40s remain a decisive decade precisely because the clock has not yet become cruel beyond repair. But the longer a person delays, the more the choices narrow. That is the real sadness. Not that a person cannot recover. That he keeps postponing the recovery because postponement is emotionally easier than confrontation. Confrontation means admitting that some of the current life may be too expensive. Confrontation means telling children no. Confrontation means driving the car that no longer signals success the way peers might expect. Confrontation means declining the upgrade. Confrontation means telling yourself that your job is not to look wealthy in your 40s. Your job is to become financially peaceful in your 60s. Those are very different goals. The first goal creates a lot of social applause. The second goal creates a lot of private relief. I know which one I would choose. Now let me talk about career, because this is where many people in their 40s become overly cautious at exactly the wrong moment. They have been with one company a long time. The pay is decent, the role is... They do not love it, but they understand it. Then an opportunity appears, a move to another firm, a chance to step into leadership, a chance to build a side business, a chance to learn a skill that could materially change earning power in the next decade, and they do not move. Why? Because the current life is too expensive to tolerate even temporary uncertainty. That is what no margin does. It makes a person conservative in the wrong way. He is not conservative with consumption. He is conservative with opportunity. That is a tragic reversal. A sensible life structure should allow a person to be aggressive where upside is real and careful where downside is stupid. Most people accidentally reverse that. They are aggressive with housing, cars, and lifestyle. Then timid when real economic opportunity appears. The 40s are often the last great decade for major earning power improvement. After that, the market becomes less forgiving, energy changes, family obligations evolve, and the runway for recovery shortens. That does not mean growth stops at 50, of course not. It means the 40s are an unusually good decade to make strategic moves. If your financial structure is not so tight that every move looks impossible. This is another hidden gift of margin. It gives courage room to operate. I do not mean reckless courage. I mean the ability to act when a real opportunity appears. That may be asking for a better role. It may be leaving a toxic one. It may be taking a job that pays meaningfully, more even if it requires discomfort. It may be investing in training, certification, or business capability that raises your income for the next 20 years. A person stuck in scarcity mode sees all change as danger. A person with margin can see change as optionality. That distinction is worth more than most people know. Now let me say something unpopular. The public often romanticizes helping children at the exact cost of abandoning parents' future. This is understandable and dangerous. I understand the instinct to want the best for children. I admire sacrifice. But sacrifice without arithmetic can become delayed dependence. If parents fund every dream using future retirement security as the sponge that absorbs the cost, then they are often not helping the family as much as they imagine. They are moving the pain. That pain returns later. A child with a prestigious diploma, but parents who must work forever, remain financially anxious, or eventually need support themselves, is not necessarily a sign of family wisdom. A wiser approach is often more emotionally difficult in the present state school over status school, scholarships over image, student participation over total parental rescue, continued retirement contributions, even during the expensive years. This can feel harsh if a household has been trained to think love means saying yes to every educational cost. Love is not the same as undisciplined financing. Sometimes love means refusing to set future selves on fire for current appearances. I say that because I have seen the other side too often. Parents in their 60s who did everything right socially and everything wrong mathematically. That is not the future I want for serious people. If I were speaking to someone entering his 40s right now, I would tell him to do 5 things. Know your true savings rate, not the number you vaguely tell yourself when you are feeling virtuous. Attack fixed costs harder than small pleasures. The house, the cars, the debt structure, and the recurring obligations matter more than coffee theater. Automate investing so the future gets funded before your moods get involved. Build and protect emergency reserves because a calm brain makes better long-term decisions than a panicked one. And treat raises as capital first, lifestyle second. That last point is very important. Lifestyle creep usually arrives disguised as harmless reward. You get a raise and the money seems to disappear almost automatically into the new normal. If at least half of every increase in income were routed into savings, investing, or debt reduction before the lifestyle adapts, an astonishing number of households would reach their 60s in completely different shape. The problem is not that the money never came. The problem is that the money was absorbed. What gets absorbed disappears from the future. What gets invested returns later in a much stronger form. People underestimate how powerful this is because no single raise changes life dramatically. But 10 years of disciplined raises can. That is what the 40s really are, not one giant decision. A string of medium-sized decisions that either expand or contract your future. People want dramatic turning points. The truth is usually quieter. The quiet turn is when you decide not to upgrade the house, when you decide the current cars are good enough, when you decide the retirement contribution will keep happening no matter what, when you decide you would rather own margin than look richer, when you decide the future version of yourself deserves more loyalty than the opinions of people who will never pay your bills. Those are the turns that matter. Now imagine yourself at 70. You wake up in a house that feels manageable. The monthly obligations are low. The savings and investments are substantial enough that you do not obsess over every expense. You can help people you love without panic. You can travel if you wish. You can rest if you wish. You can decline nonsense because you are no longer negotiating from scarcity. That is one future. Now, imagine another. You wake up and the first thought is expense taxes, medication, insurance, the roof, the car. You calculate before breakfast. You feel that sick little tightening when one unexpected bill appears. You cannot help your family much because you are barely holding your own ground. You still need income from somewhere because the capital never got enough runway. That is another future. Neither future appears overnight. Both were built in middle age. That is why I say the 40s do not mainly decide how rich you look. They decide how calm your life feels later. And calm is one of the most undervalued forms of wealth in the world. I know people who would not call themselves rich and yet live with immense calm because their structure is strong. I know people who appear prosperous and live with constant pressure because the structure underneath the image is weak. Image is not the point. Structure is the point. Always. If you are in your 20s or 30s, learn this now and you will spare yourself a lot of pain later. If you are just entering your 40s, understand that you are standing in the decade where your choices have extraordinary leverage. If you are already in your late 40s and this all sounds uncomfortably familiar, do not waste energy on shame. Shame is expensive and unproductive. Use the discomfort as information. A smaller house later is still better than no freedom later. A cheaper car now is still better than quiet panic later. A stronger savings rate from today forward is still better than elegant excuses. A delayed retirement funded by wise late decisions is still better than a crisis funded by stubbornness. It is almost never too late to improve the structure, but it does get harder every year that you postpone the truth. So if there is one sentence I would leave you with, it is this. Your 40s are not the decade where you prove success to the world. They are the decade where you decide whether your future self will live with margin or with dependence. That is the real fork in the road. Not flashy, not cinematic, just immensely important. And if you choose well enough, quietly enough, and repeatedly enough, the result is not merely a larger number. The result is a quieter life. I have always thought that was one of the finest returns money can provide.